what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start with a project that actually began with some research I did as a graduate student that looks at this condition of Indian Bend Wash in Scottsdale, Arizona. Sometimes it takes a flood to change the way the government thinks. And this is a picture of Indian Bend Wash in Scottsdale circa 1960. You can see that when the 100-year floods come, and they don't always come every 100 years, they come more frequently than that, it can really be tragic for the urban environment around it. In the late 1960s, the Army Corps of Engineers were called in to help mitigate the water issue here in Scottsdale. And what they proposed was analogous to, this is the LA River, if you're familiar with that in Los Angeles, the Terminator 2 movies, et cetera, a large concrete basin that would run the 22 miles of Scottsdale. If you can imagine how devastating that would be to the civic environment of the city. In a kind of incredible moment of enlightenment, the city convinced the Army Corps of Engineers that that was a bad idea and decided that a park would be a better idea. And this was one of the first projects of its type in the country where a park, a linear park, a 22-mile linear park, it's about half the distance. Scottsdale is a north-south city, a long linear city. This park became an amenity for the city. But it was not just an amenity. As you can see in the image, just below the flood image, is a contemporary flood and how that water is managed. So ostensibly what you have is an amenity that becomes an infrastructure. And this notion of amenity infrastructure is a thread that comes through the work that I'm going to show you tonight. Here's a contemporary image of the park, and you can see the variety of different uses that it currently affords. So from Indian Bend Park, I'm going to talk about the first project, which is entitled Stripscape. This was a project that was completed in 2004. It is a really probably the most intensive project I've ever done. It might not look, I mean, I'm still a fairly young architect, but it was a, let's just say there were 60 presentations given for this project. The project had a series of stakeholders. This is partly why it was so intensive. The councilman, Phil Gordon, who is now the mayor of Phoenix, was a councilman for the district that we started the project. In 1998, the 7th Avenue merchants along this north-south corridor formed a merchants association. And they came to the city and said, hey, we've got a hardship here that you widened the street in 1965, and our businesses are not doing well. We don't know, you need to do something to help us. We're not sure if we can survive, et cetera. And this part of the city was not in any way on the map for the mayor, for any of the municipalities. So the project was a collaboration between these various street departments. And we began, they came to the university at the time, and they said, the city did, and said, could you help us? And my research at the time was looking at these commercial corridors as a typology in post-war American cities. And I said, sure, that'd be great. Let's try and do this project. So, of course, I began with a theoretical construct. This image on your right is a picture of 7th Avenue. You can see it's a cacophony of signage and businesses. It's really a 1950s strip, not unlike most commercial strips you see around the country. One of the things that's unique about this strip is that it is predominantly mom and pop shops. There, except for a Circle K on the corner at the entrance of this 1 mile stretch, everything else is not a corporation. I looked to the artist Azar Yorn, who's a situationist artist in the 1950s, many of you may be familiar with, and his modification paintings that he was doing at the time, where he would pick up a conventionally painted canvas, sometimes a kitsch painting, and he would paint over these, not complete. He would call them mutilations, but not completely erasing the painting behind, but in fact reestablishing a new value to something that was old into something that's new. And so this, for me, this question of revitalization and revaluation, how could one begin to look at this kitsch condition of the landscape, make a certain insertion into it that might actually revalue it in some capacity but without erasure. Second inspiration for the project for me, and as a kind of tactical approach, was how are people making do? How are they surviving along this commercial corridor? As I mentioned, it was widened in 1975. You can see this center image with the billboard movie on it, the sidewalk, and then the property line. There's really no room for any kind of landscape, beautification, et cetera, et cetera. But I was reminded of the photographs of Jeff Wall, and I started to, did we just lose that? I started to look at these sort of one-act plays, these tableaux vivants that he staged, and Stumbling Block was one that I was reminded of. If you're familiar with this photograph, there's this guy laying down across the city sidewalk. He's wearing pads that look like a cross between a catcher's uniform and a hockey uniform, and he's got a badge, maybe a city badge, and a helmet. And these people going to work are tripping over him, and in a kind of surrealist moment are being shocked out of their everyday life into potentially a kind of new reality. And so these one-act stage situations, I grabbed some students and went out to 7th Avenue and started to stage things that we felt could be appropriate in the area. So the two images on the top on the right are actual conditions that were happening there, and I have others. But this is a small area outside of a retail shop that had room for one outdoor table, and then an abandoned building that was used for a flea market and for selling goods. We imagined everything from an outdoor theater to areas of parking lots that were underutilized that could be used for dining, graffiti parks and back alleys that could be used for picnics. So you can understand these were tools we used to get the city to understand that some of these things are not so crazy, perhaps, if we could montage them the proper way and get them to think differently. The other tactic that I employed was a way of photographing the way in which the landscape was being used by the merchants. And what this did was it created a lexicon, a kind of new urban language that we could use with the city and use with the merchants to explain to them what was really happening there and why some of that was not negative, but in fact positive. One that I'll highlight maybe is this one, which is the retail garage sale. This is where the antique stores along the area they really turn their store inside out, and they take their wares and they put them out in the parking lot. Now this is against the city code. They get cited for this, but when you've got cars moving at 45 miles an hour along the strip, there's really very few things that you can do to get people to understand what's in your business. So like a garage sale, the cars would slow down and look to see what was there and maybe pull over. So again, this was another tactical way that we began to look at the context. The other way was to look at it in section. And one of the things we discovered here was that at about 12 to 14 feet, there was a datum that was starting to occur in the site. And that datum was really a result of many of these post-war buildings, their type of construction, and where their signage was occurring. And so we started to find some threads that began to link this project together. So the main thesis, if you will, was to try to take this consumptive landscape and try to make it more productive and more pedestrian friendly and serve both the merchants and the neighborhood and really create an identity for the area to help with its revitalization. So obviously billboards are completely consumptive and shade is an amenity, and it is really something that's worth something in a city like Phoenix. So the thesis here was, could you turn signage into a shading device? And if you could, what were the possibilities of a city full of shade signs? And also the visual litter of the site was quite complex, and the idea was to try to reduce that by absorbing car shaded shelters, pedestrian lighting, and signage. And the last piece, one of the things about Arizona is that the sun, after about 2:30, it gets low in the sky, and when it's low in the sky, a horizontal shade is not going to do anything for you, and it's really that vertical shade that you have to start thinking about. And in fact, it's the most complex situation to deal with in a city like Phoenix because the sun is so hot. So taking a page from the bus shelters that exist there, these kind of vertical screens, and then monument signage, and then we started a new public art program that created these art panels that could be used to shade areas of the site, but also every 6 months the art changes. Some of the details of the canopy that we developed, we call it the lampshade. It's a XX 8-inch steel pole. It is just Corten steel. It's rusted, so if it gets tagged, we can brush it. There's a custom aluminum extrusion that we designed for the canopy so we could hide all the fasteners. And then an aluminum light box that's then cantilevered off of this. And there's an interesting story. When I began the project with the city streets department, the canopies had 4 legs, and then at about 60% set, they had 3 legs, then they had 2 legs, then they had 1 leg. And they literally laughed at me when I showed them it only had 1 leg. The intention behind it was to try to get things out of the way of the automobiles that were there, but also to try to be as efficient as possible. So what we did is we convinced the city to build a prototype to test it, and we were part of my firm was part of a show at the Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art called Southwest Net, and as part of the show, we built the prototype. We're in good company. This is a Will Bruder building, and that glass wall is a prismatic glass wall by Jamie Carpenter. So it was very modest for us to be there, humbling, I should say, to be there. And so we call it a lampshade. It's a shading device at night. This is actual bus stop in front of the museum, and at night it illuminates and becomes a lamp. So the multiple unit configurations, you combine the art panels with the lampshades, and you can have everything from a bus shelter to a shaded arcade to a marketplace, et cetera. And so the idea was that this unit, this constellation of pieces could be multiplied throughout the site and begin to create an identity for the area, but also become a programmatic amenity for the merchants. We took the photographs of the things that we looked at and began to imagine how the merchants could appropriate these for their outdoor display, cafes. There are a lot of automotive mechanics there that deal with classic cars, and so how could they display those there? Okay, I'm going to quickly talk about the urban situation for the project. We helped the city. We wrote a grant for about $500,000. It's the most you can get from federal T21 funding. The city matched it with another $700,000. So we had about $1.3 million to do this demonstration site. And we decided that rather than sprinkle the project over the full 1 mile corridor, we would look at just one site and try to have the most impact. And then if that was successful, we would take it north. So the project is composed of a set of elements. The first are the first layer, if you will, are the bands. These are 20-foot by 60-foot concrete, stained concrete bands that come across the street. Scottsdale Road, 7th Avenue is right here. This is Heatherbrae. It's a cross street into the neighborhoods. So the bands mark the scale of the automobile, and they connect both block to block and across and create a threshold as you're driving through. Next layer are the vertical panels, or the art panels. These are strategically located to work with bus shelters and outdoor display areas. There was an island here that was part of the city right away that we appropriated. This is due to the surveying of the Jeffersonian grid. There was a shift in that calculation, and so we end up with a couple of these things that happen in the city, so we thought that was a good place to begin to demonstrate the project. The next layer are a set of canopies that, as I mentioned, the lampshades and where they're located. This is the project as we built it. And then a set of trees. Now the lampshades, I should mention, they're like the tatami mat of the city. They're 9 by 18. They're 12 feet in the air at that datum line at the bottom. They're 2 feet tall, and garbage trucks are 11 feet, so they don't hit them. But they're arrayed out into the landscape for both automobiles and for pedestrians. The trees create a gateway into the neighborhood. So here's a before shot. We worked with a color specialist out of San Diego. The site, all of the buildings were white when we got there, and for these merchants, their building is their biggest sign, and you can imagine the fluorescent colors that we were seeing in some places. But the idea was to create a family of colors that would create greater contrast between the buildings, but also allow the building to stand out some more. And you can see that there's very little right-of-way moving east to west. And you can see on Scottsdale Road, on 7th Avenue, this is the sidewalk, that's the property, and then there's very little parking. So this is the project. If you go to Google Earth, it almost looks like that. It's a little bit frightening. But the project as it exists today looks like this. And then the intention was that merchants could then purchase these lampshades. The cost of the lampshade is about $15,000. which might seem like a lot, but the cost for a standard sign that's out there is about $10,000. Now, if you imagine the lampshade's also a covered parking space, you add that cost into it, and the fact that the city's now made this a standard detail for 7th Avenue, it increases the signage for the business threefold. So we thought that that was a pretty good marketing strategy so that the merchants would begin to purchase these, and it's slowly starting to happen, but the project, I'll explain in a few minutes, we revamped a couple of things. So just to recap, you've got the city investment, the color scheme that was developed for the merchants. We came up, they named their area Melrose on 7th, not after the TV show, but after the neighborhoods. There are Melrose neighborhoods just to the east and west of the site. We did letterhead. We worked with the graphic designer Jennifer Brungart, and we made T-shirts. And then, of course, this is what the merchants would do in their investment in the project. So some images of the project after it was completed. You can see the art panels. One of the things I'll mention is that the graphics, Jennifer did the graphics around the canopies. It's a scan of the leaf pattern of the evergreen elms that we planted in the site. And they subsequently burned. The sun was so intense that they burned the graphics off. So I'll show you some images I took last week. We reclad the canopies in an aluminum panel system. I didn't mention these green screen walls. So here's a bus shelter. You can see how it shades the south sun, the west sun, and then the overhead piece. At night, they begin to illuminate. This is a bus shelter here. There was a high graffiti area in this area, and after the shelters were in place, the graffiti dropped by over 70%, and the canopies have never been tagged. So we're pretty happy about that. And we realized, I learned a lesson here about these little benches that we put in. The city was like, well, why do you want to put benches in there? There's no reason. And we said, well, we just think it would be more humane. And in fact, we got a lot of feedback that just having a bench out there, which sounds, a little cliche, but just having a bench out there was really terrific. So I think a lot of these guys might be guys that might have been tagging the place, but now they seem to be enjoying it. Single pole, double canopy, fewest numbers of connections. Every connection to the ground is the same. It's a circular steel ring with a pole. The city knows how to put poles in the ground, so I figured, don't fight it. The lights inside are high-performance fluorescent lighting, and they're in a dropstick pattern. We just replaced them. It was 5 years. It costs about $60 a month to run the lighting for the canopies. They're on a photovoltaic, so they come on and come off with the sun. So a couple of before and afters just to kind of understand context. And I know these are like the architectural shots with no people in them, but I'll get to those. This is important. I think that you've got cars running down here 45 miles an hour, and people standing to make the crosswalk. This actually puts them on stage. You see them more. There have been fewer accidents in the area, and we want to attribute that to the lampshades. I'm not sure that's true, but they seem to be working well for that. And of course, in the summer, one of the interesting things that happens in Arizona, and if you've been there, is that there'll be like a street light that comes up like this, and when you see people waiting at the intersection, they'll actually stand, I'm not kidding, in the 8 inches of shade that the street lamp pole makes. And so we thought this was a little bit more generous for them. Here's a before and after. This is you can see how dark it was here in the past. A lot of the crime has been reduced in the area, and again, I think that's due to the lighting and the illumination of the site. So every 6 months, the art panels change, and they make a big deal out of it. The TV cameras are out there. New artists come out, and there's a thing called First Nights that are happening in Arizona now and in Phoenix. And every Friday night of the month, the first Friday of the month, there's a large gathering. This couple things to note that have changed. You can see the bands from the fluorescents here. We changed that, put them around the perimeter. We learned a little something about signs. And then these have changed. So one of the great things that's happened for me in the project is that the businesses nearby, this was an old gas station, actually from the 1940s. And about a year after we built the project, the area started to shift. And Copper Star Coffee now, they found actually the old gas pump. This is one of the most successful coffee houses in the area. And it's a complete mom and pop shop. We had nothing to do with the architecture, but we did help them try to get through the city. This was formerly a pornographic bookstore. It's now the Wagon Wash. I thought that was a good programmatic shift. And so you can see that there's some greater pride of ownership. People are starting to come back, and I think a lot of it has to do with the creation of the identity of this place. The Melrose Center, this sign, not the building, but the sign, was just put on the historic registry for Phoenix, because they renovated the sign. This is a picture I took of the project just last Saturday. They have a street fair now after the creation of the project, and there are over 1,000 people at this street fair, and you can see the vines, the bougainvillea have gone crazy, which I love that. And here you can start to see this is the perforated aluminum panel. There actually is going to be a colored Lexan piece that goes behind it, so you can read the graphics on the edges. We haven't done that yet. This is a great technology. I don't know if you're familiar with this program called Rasterbator. You can basically take, I didn't invent the program. You can take an image and run it through this program, and it'll turn it into basically like a Roy Lichtenstein painting and into vectors, and then you can CNC punch it. And so what we did is we created, with 11 different hole sizes, we created a pattern, punched it through the aluminum. So it's pretty impervious to a lot of things, so we're not worried about it burning. And we think it'll be there for a long time. And at night, it's really quite spectacular. A couple images of the. This is my favorite use of the canopy. They didn't get the memo. So here you can start to see that perforated aluminum pattern. Once it's illuminated, the light boxes, we changed the underside to a perforated aluminum as well. And so we're pretty happy with the way this is starting to come out. And we think we finally found a solution that's not going to degrade in the sun.